Initially, the idea of sacrificing Ukraine to focus on more critical threats in a multi-front war seems logical from a resource allocation standpoint. However, withdrawing American support could inadvertently play into Russia's hands. Without U.S. assistance, Ukraine would likely struggle financially, lack necessary military equipment, and face tactical disadvantages, potentially leading to Russia gaining the upper hand in the conflict. This would embolden Putin to further expand Russian influence, possibly targeting Baltic states and Moldova, which are already apprehensive about Russian aggression. The alternative strategy, favored by the United States, involves continuing to support Ukraine financially. This support serves not only as a means to keep Russian attention diverted, but also reflects broader U.S. interests in European stability. Despite committing significant aid, the U.S. may refrain from direct involvement in combat, preferring to leverage NATO's capabilities. NATO, predominantly composed of European members, could be called upon to intensify its role in defending Ukraine and potentially countering Russian aggression. The article acknowledges challenges in securing NATO's full commitment, especially concerning direct confrontation with Russia, given the nuclear threat Moscow poses. While NATO's Article 5 obliges collective defense, the proximity of most NATO members to Russian nuclear capabilities complicates the decision to escalate conflicts to broader European theaters. In the event of a conflict, both the United States and Russia are aware of the catastrophic consequences of nuclear escalation, leading to a preference for conventional warfare. The United States, historically engaged in asymmetric conflicts against insurgent groups, would face a different challenge from Russia, which possesses significant conventional military capabilities comparable to those of a few other nations. Key to America's strategy would be countering Russia's combined arms operations, which includes sophisticated rocket and tube artillery and a substantial air force. Despite recent setbacks in Ukraine, Russia maintains aerial capabilities that could complicate American ground operations by diverting attention and limiting air support. Strategically, the Bering Strait emerges as a critical focal point. Controlling this narrow passage between Alaska and Russia would provide tactical advantages, potentially enabling ground troop movements and influencing naval access. The United States would likely seek cooperation from Canada, leveraging NATO alignment and shared interests to secure dominance in these waters. Naval capabilities play a pivotal role in this scenario. The U.S. boasts significant advantages with its fleet of aircraft carriers and destroyers, which outnumber Russia's single aircraft carrier and limited fleet. This naval superiority would allow the U.S. to project air power effectively, potentially neutralizing Russia's smaller, more mobile vessels in the shallow waters of the Bering Strait. Both sides have strategic assets around the Bering Strait. American bases such as Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska and Russian installations on islands like Kotelny and Wrangel would play crucial roles in supporting naval operations and securing territorial control. The article posits that whoever controls the Bering Strait gains direct access to the opponent's homeland. The United States, at a minimum, would aim to defend this strategic passage against Russian advances, safeguarding its own interests and potentially leveraging the strait for offensive operations. Economically, a war with Russia would exacerbate existing challenges within the United States, such as supply chain disruptions and inflation. Furthermore, significant expenditures on military operations would divert resources away from domestic priorities, potentially straining social services. However, the U.S. could also leverage its economic might to impose sanctions that inflict similar economic hardships on Russia, strengthening existing measures aimed at countering Russia's actions in Ukraine. The effectiveness of these sanctions, however, hinges on global support, which may be uncertain given other geopolitical dynamics, notably the complex relationship with China. Russia, in response to heightened sanctions, could pivot towards increasing trade with Asian partners like China, India, and Turkey, as noted in reports by The Telegraph. This strategic maneuver aims to mitigate the economic impact of Western sanctions. The United States would need to counteract these efforts by rallying support from allies and partners worldwide to uphold and enforce effective sanctions against Russia. This diplomatic effort includes leveraging alliances like NATO and potentially compelling member states such as Turkey to align their economic policies more closely with Western interests. India, a recent member of the BRICS alliance, presents both a challenge and an opportunity for the U.S. to influence regional dynamics. By emphasizing shared interests and offering economic and political incentives, the U.S. could persuade India to reduce its economic ties with Russia, thereby further isolating Moscow economically. Kyrgyzstan emerges as another focal point due to its increased trade with Germany following sanctions on Russia. The U.S. would likely seek to prevent Kyrgyzstan from serving as a proxy for Russian trade, applying political pressure on European allies to curb such activities. Firstly, the shift from asymmetric warfare to confronting Russia's heavy artillery capabilities would require a reorientation of U.S. military strategy. The U.S. possesses substantial artillery capabilities, which would be crucial in countering Russia's military strength in conventional battles. Secondly, the Bering Strait emerges as a strategic priority for the U.S., aiming to establish naval dominance to both deter Russian aggression and potentially enable direct access into Russian territory. This strategic control would bolster American defensive capabilities and provide operational advantages. Economically, the U.S. would escalate sanctions against Russia, while diplomatically urging semi-allied nations to limit or cease trading with Moscow. This dual approach seeks to isolate Russia economically and weaken its ability to sustain military operations. However, a significant challenge looms in the form of China, which could align with Russia in a conflict against the U.S. Despite historical tensions and broken alliances, the economic and military modernization of China presents a formidable threat. China's military budget, potentially much larger than officially reported, coupled with its efficient use of resources, poses a complex challenge for U.S. strategists. To counter Chinese influence and aggression, the U.S. would likely rely heavily on its alliances in the Asia-Pacific, particularly with Japan and South Korea. These nations, bound by treaties and frequent joint military exercises, would play crucial roles in deterring Chinese advancements. Deploying naval forces and reinforcing military bases in Japan and South Korea would strengthen American defensive capabilities and facilitate potential offensive actions against China if necessary. Australia, though less heavily fortified compared to Japan and South Korea, still hosts strategically important U.S. military bases. These installations would contribute to regional stability and provide additional operational flexibility against any Chinese aggression in the Asia-Pacific region. Through alliances with Japan, South Korea, and Australia, the United States effectively surrounds China from various directions, forming a potential geopolitical pincer movement. Cooperative military drills and partnerships, exemplified by joint exercises like the China-focused air drills in February 2023 involving the US, Australia, and the UK, demonstrate a clear alignment against Chinese interests. However, the article notes that while these alliances can create strategic challenges for Beijing, they are insufficient on their own to decisively defeat China. China's formidable military capabilities could overwhelm individual nations, like Australia, South Korea, and Japan, and even collectively, they may struggle without direct U.S. intervention. The potential involvement of North Korea further complicates the regional security landscape. The United States would likely augment its Asian alliances with a steady deployment of troops and equipment to its numerous bases surrounding China. This positioning not only enhances defensive capabilities, but also provides logistical advantages for potential offensive actions toward Beijing. Specifically, the article emphasizes the strategic importance of Djibouti, where both China and the U.S. maintain military bases in close proximity. Camp Lemonnier, operated by the U.S., and China's base represent crucial footholds in the region. The U.S. could exert pressure on Djibouti to terminate its agreement with China or directly engage in a military confrontation, to summarize it into 300 words. Djibouti is situated on the Red Sea, a major trading route. The United States' sovereignty over the Red Sea, which accounts for 12% of world trade, might hinder China's capacity to trade while strengthening its own position. Winning the Red Sea War would be a devastating strike against Iranian-led proxy troops, contributing to the Fourth Front discussed in this video. Controlling the waterways in the Red Sea and near Japan would prevent China's nuclear submarines from approaching the U.S. and launching an attack. Let's start with the latter. Since Israel's battle with Hamas began, the Houthis have repeatedly attacked cargo ships in the Red Sea. Containment of the Houthi threat would be a priority, especially since the United States established its dominance in Djibouti. Fortunately for the US, the Houthis do not pose a significant military danger. The US may rely on Saudi Arabia's modern navy to monitor the Red Sea and respond to commercial ship alarms in case of an attack by Houthis. Saudi Arabia is likely to comply because of its alliance with the US and concerns over Iran's growing influence in the Middle East. Poses a threat to themselves. In addition to including Saudi Arabia, the US plans to coordinate operations against Houthi installations in Yemen, similar to the January 11th strikes with the UK that hit 60 targets over 16 sites. More strikes would reduce the Houthi danger to the US by pushing them to hide in Yemen. The US's approach to Hamas and Hezbollah is already clear. Let Israel handle them. The US would likely pay and supplement Israeli forces fighting these groups with troops and intelligence from its secret Site 512 base in Israel. However, it may not get directly involved. While the experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq were beneficial for combating guerrilla tactics, they also demonstrated that even the most powerful troops face challenges from rebels. Allowing an ally to handle the majority of the labor prevents insurgents from spreading their influence outside their own countries. In addition to targeting proxies, the US may use sanctions to destroy Iran's economy. They're already aware that this method works. In 2006, the United Nations Security Council imposed punitive sanctions, resulting in a 20% domestic unemployment rate. In 2018, Donald Trump reimposed American sanctions, causing Iran to experience its greatest economic crisis in over 40 years. Granted, the sanctions embolden the country's hardliners. With China and Russia on the agenda, the US may view Iran as a problem to address later, after dealing with more challenging adversaries in its multi-front battle. That brings us to the final front, the internal war. American leaders must unite their people behind these efforts, despite widespread belief that the country is increasingly divided. Despite divisions, Americans' trust in the military remains strong. A 2023 survey held between October and November polled 2,506 people on their faith in the military. Almost half, 46%, said they express faith in the US military. Despite a 2% decrease from the 2022 study, the US military remains the most trusted public organization, the country. Americans have a higher level of trust in their military than they do in the Supreme Court. They trust their military forces more than the president. Herein lies the secret to forging togetherness. Militaristic propaganda could rally support for the US's multi-front war effort. This would be a rare instance of a direct attack against the United States. Instead of debating the amount of financing for NATO or other countries, the American public would be more concerned that China and Russia must be dealt with, or their way of life will cease to exist. We know how Americans react when they are under attack. In the aftermath of 9/11s, the American people were connected by sadness and great patriotism, which enabled George Bush to legitimize his invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. Biden hopes that it won't take a direct attack on U.S. territory to spark patriotic enthusiasm. Instead, he would rely on the media to report on China, Russia, and Iran's actions, emphasizing that each step they take, especially if they form alliances, would bring them closer to threatening the U.S. in its own land. Should the misinformation campaign be successful, Biden convinced, he hopes to expand military spending to address many threats simultaneously. There is no doubt about it. The United States relied on its allies to execute its war strategy across all fronts, would suffer the darkest peril in its nearly 250-year history. Thanks for watching. Hit the like button and press the subscribe icon for more interesting uploads.